Matt Lenihan Boxing Social in association with Empire Fight Store and our Kings. Always a pleasure. Stephen Espinoza, we're here, Las Vegas. What a fight week. By the way, David Benavidez and against David Morell, on paper, looks like a pure 50-50 with two guys entering the primes of their careers. How excited are you to see this matchup on Saturday night?
Look, it's fantastic. Tom Brown said it a couple days ago. This is as good as any fight you can make in boxing. I know everybody's very interested in the Benavidez-Morrell rematch, in which I am as well. I think this is every bit as good as that in any other fight, because these are two guys in their prime. There's a lot of heat. There's a lot of personal rivalry, and again, when we've talked about this, sometimes when you've got a big, exciting main event, it overshadows the rest of the card. But very quietly, the rest of the card is really, really solid too. I mean, I don't like to use the word stacked because everyone uses it, but this is one where all four fights are meaningful fights, and look like all action.
Yeah, from top to bottom. I mean, Pitbull, Cruz, chuck him on any undercard anywhere in the world, even a main event, and people will tune in. Obviously, you got Stephen Fulton. He'll learn a lot from the defeat to, obviously, Inoue, and he's obviously fought Figueroa before, so that's a great fight. In terms of this main event, though, I want to know, for instance, if Benavidez comes through this test, which is, I think, it's a big test, I think it's an equal test for both, what does the door open to next? We all know what we want to see Benavidez do, but it looks like we're going to see Canelo pivot and potentially go for Terence Crawford. What do you think's next for him potentially?
Well, as we've said over the years, I mean, the great thing about David Benavidez is when he hasn't gotten that fight, the fight we're not going to talk about, what he's done is he's just continued to move forward and take risky fights and not wait. And I think there's a lot that the rest of the sport can take. And certainly there are other fighters like that. But a lot of times you see fighters sort of treading water, either waiting or take non-meaningful fights because there's something better maybe lurking. That's not David Benavidez. David has, sort of said, look, I'd love to have Canelo. If it doesn't happen, give me the next biggest fight. And he's done that, and he's fought guys that no one's looking particularly forward to facing, guys like Morell, guys like Andre.
Yeah.
He just continues to do it over and over again. And look, he's even said it before, you talk about guys that no one wants to face, he'll be the mandatory for the winner of Benavidez-Morrell, and he hasn't been shy. He hasn't been shy. He said, sure, give it to me.
Are you a fan of the Crawford-Canelo proposed matchup? Obviously, Crawford's moving up in weight. We're hearing there's no rehydration clause, which I know sometimes it's normally a bit of give and take, but Canelo's Canelo, and if he says no, you're sort of dealing with his A side in terms of that fight. Are you a fan of this, and what chance do you give Terence Crawford in that fight?
I wouldn't say I'm not a fan. It's not. Wouldn't be my first choice, if I ruled the world. But look, it's coming. It looks very likely to get finalized. And the reality is, once it is finalized, people will get excited. Like, it's sort of like, okay, that's what we're getting. I don't want to spend a lot of time saying, look, we should have gotten this or that. When we've got something it's not bad, and it is intriguing. I do think the weight is going to be a major factor. And the size, but so for that reason, I probably prefer a different fight. But I can get into this one, and I'll get excited, and I think everybody else will as well.
Where do you put a Terence Crawford now, who's already sort of certified in boxing? His achievements, speak for themselves. Where do you put a Terence Crawford if he beats Canelo? It doesn't matter how he does it. I mean, if he stopped him, I think that'd be incredibly impressive. But if he gets past this test and manages to get a victory, where does he sit amongst the greats of this sport?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly would be one of the biggest upsets, in quite a while. I'm trying to think of when last time we've seen like a much smaller guy upset. I mean, you might have to go back to Pacquiao De La Hoya.
Yes.
When, everybody coming in who were sort of saying, hey, look, this fight maybe shouldn't even been happening because one guy's too small. And that guy ended up winning. If he does it, it's a monumental accomplishment. And at that point, I think Terence Crawford has answered every question. He can retire, he can do whatever he wants, but certainly if he decided at his age and what he's accomplished that he's done it all, I wouldn't disagree with that.
There's always hype surrounding, when I come on to Gervonta Davis now, Lamont Roach, that fight's coming up in New York. I think Gervonta is at that stage now, and I've said it to a few people, especially the UK side. Over here, I think he could pretty much fight anyone, and people would show up, and that's that superstar appeal of, I suppose, he could fight someone in this room, and I think there would still be eyes on it because of what he brings. The test, obviously, Lamont's going upon us, so I feel like as a free hit, nothing really much to lose here, everything to gain. What type of stylistic sort of matchup do you expect this to be?
Look, I think Lamont is probably an underrated guy because he doesn't have the biggest name. But look, we saw it a little bit in the Benavidez fight, in the Vodchik fight. There, David had an opponent that was very familiar with him, that had done a ton of sparring with him. And I think, personally, that's one of the reasons that Vodchik gave him some problems. Now, Lamont Roach doesn't have as long a history as Vodchik did with Benavidez, but he certainly, goes back a while. They've been in the same circles. They spent time in the ring together, and I think that's a major advantage to be able to have seen that style before.
Whenever I speak to anyone, Dan Raphael, even some of the more distinguished journalists from the UK, and I say, look, we've seen a lot of big fights now because of the influx of Saudi Arabia, and obviously over here at PBC, they historically put on the biggest fights. So we're sort of seeing all these Disneyland fights. But when I ask what's the one fight that hasn't been made that you want to see, especially over here, it's Gervonta Davis and Shakur Stevenson. That's what I hear from everyone. You must look at that fight and go, for boxing in this country over here, that could be a mega event which stops where the world stops to watch.
Yeah, I mean, it really has all of the ingredients. It's got a sort of a long build-up. You've had a heated rivalry. You've got a good mix of styles. You've got two guys who are clearly in their prime. I love that fight. I mean, I love the Ryan Garcia rematch as well. I think, weight might become an issue the longer that time goes by. But I think, those two are both monster fights.
In terms of the PBC schedule coming up, huge statement with this fight. I think both men need commending for taking this fight. 'Cause like you say, they can go alternate routes. Like David Morell's 10, 11 and 0. He would be remiss for saying, you know what, no, not right now. And Benavidez risking it all really when he's in this good position. What's the sort of schedule do you think coming up, and what fights can we look forward to?
Well, we're still working on the undercard for Tank for March 1, and then I think the next one up is Fundora. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about that, but I think that will get finalized and be the next one up in the schedule after Tank, and then beyond that, I mean, it remains to be seen what Canelo's going to do, when and where. I mean, everyone assumes it'll be May, and and who it's against and who it's with is still very much up in the air. So I think, look, once we got going here in February, I think it's going to be pretty busy coming forward.
Do you think we see Errol Spence in the mix again? I know there was talk of the Fundora fight. It's been talked about for about 18 months. Is he back?
I do. I wouldn't doubt that he's back at all, because the reality is the reports from the gym, for what they're worth, are that he looked really, really good. Now that's from the gym, and gym is different than in the ring. But people that I trust very well and who speak honestly and objectively has said he looked really good coming into that fight. So I'm anxious to see him back.
100%. Stephen, look, I think it's about to get going. I appreciate your time as always. Catch up soon.
All right. See you.